If you enjoy tales of the Old West, stories of grit, quiet men, and unexpected choices, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps these Wild West stories alive, and I'd love to hear what you think should happen next in this one. Now, settle in, because our story begins on a lonely stretch of the frontier. Daniel Carter lived alone for 9 years on a quiet ranch that sat against the edge of the plains. His spread was modest, 50 head of cattle, a couple of sturdy horses, and a weathered cabin with a porch that creaked under his boots. To him, that was enough. He had ridden trail drives in his youth, seen men die for pride and whiskey, and left that life behind in search of peace. Now his days passed in steady rhythm, mending fences, boiling beans, riding the range under an endless sky. That morning had been no different. He worked until the sun dipped low, the air painted gold, and a hush fell over the land. He sat with his pipe at dusk, gazing at the stars. Solitude did not trouble him, it had become his closest companion. He told himself he needed no one, not anymore. But when the storm came, all that changed. Wind tore at the shutters, rattling them like bones. Rain beat down in thick sheets, the kind that swallows sound and makes the world feel smaller. Daniel threw another log on the fire and tightened the latch on the door, ready to wait out the night. That was when he heard it, a faint thump, almost lost to the storm. Then another. He rose, revolver at his side, and unbarred the door. Lightning split the sky, and in that flash he saw them, 2 figures slumped on his porch, soaked to the skin. They were young girls, no more than 16 or 17, their braids undone, their faces pale from exhaustion. One tried to rise, whispering something he could barely hear. The other collapsed fully, her cheek pressing against the wet boards. Daniel cursed under his breath. He could have turned them away. He should have, perhaps, for the frontier was no place for charity, and sheltering strangers often bred trouble. But he was not the kind of man who could leave 2 children to die in the rain. He knelt, lifted them both with arms that had once swung saddles and carried wounded friends, and brought them inside. The warmth of the fire brought color back to their faces. He set out blankets, water, and bread from his stores. They ate with trembling hands, as though expecting the food to vanish if they hesitated. When their bellies were full enough to speak, they told him, in broken English, that their names were Tayet and Ren. Sisters. Their village had been burned by raiders, men who carried rifles and rode hard, leaving death in their wake. They had run until their legs failed, and the storm drove them to his door. Daniel listened in silence, jaw set. He wanted to believe their story ended there, that the men who had done such violence would not follow. But he knew better. On the plains, every act echoed. Men who destroyed villages did not leave survivors behind if they could help it. When the girls finished speaking, silence filled the cabin. Daniel sat back in his chair, pipe unlit, staring into the flames. He thought of his quiet life, the cattle that needed tending, the fences always in need of repair. He thought of how hard he had fought for his solitude, how much he hated the memory of blood and gunpowder. He had sworn never again to be drawn into other men's battles. And yet, here were 2 girls, barely alive, looking to him with desperate eyes. "You can rest here for tonight," he said at last, his voice low but steady. "Come morning, we'll see about your next steps." Relief softened their faces. Ren, the younger, curled up by the fire almost immediately, her breathing deepening into sleep. Taya lingered a moment longer, watching Daniel with eyes too sharp for her years. She seemed to understand something he would not admit aloud, that by opening his door, he had already chosen a side. When he was sure they slept, Daniel stood and looked out through the window. The rain had eased, leaving the plains wrapped in mist. In the mud outside, he could see tracks. Horses had passed near his ranch earlier that day, too many to belong to a simple trail party. His stomach tightened. He closed the shutters and stoked the fire. Behind him, the girls slept soundly, unaware of what tomorrow might bring. He should have felt anger at the intrusion, fear for what would come. Instead, he felt something he had not known in years, a spark of purpose, fragile yet undeniable. Daniel Carter had built 9 years of peace out here on the edge of nowhere. But peace was fragile, and trouble had a way of finding men, no matter how far they ran. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat back down, staring into the flames, knowing the storm outside was only the beginning. The plains had been quiet for so long. But as he listened to the wind die down, he realized the silence had changed. It was no longer the quiet of solitude. It was the quiet before a fight. Dawn broke pale and uncertain, the horizon painted in shades of rose and gray. Daniel saddled his horse as the girls stirred from their sleep. Their faces were drawn, but there was life in their eyes now, the kind that hunger and fear could not easily erase. Taya, the elder, moved with a quiet caution, watching him as if measuring the man who had offered them shelter. Rin clung to her sister's side, her gaze darting at every creak of the cabin walls. Daniel had planned to let them rest, maybe guide them toward safer ground. But when he stepped outside, his boots sank into the churned mud of fresh hoof prints. They were recent, made during the storm. His chest tightened. He had been right the night before. Men had ridden close, perhaps scouting. Trouble was already on his land. He said nothing to the girls at first, not wanting panic to take root. He split wood for the fire, fed the horses, and tried to cling to his old rhythm. But when he returned to the cabin, Taya's eyes met his. She already knew. She did not need words to sense danger, it was written in the stiffness of his shoulders. By mid-morning, the riders came. Dust trailed behind them as 6 men approached the ranch, their horses restless and lean, their coats stained by travel. They did not carry the weariness of simple cowhands. Their faces were hard, their movements sharp, and Daniel could tell at once what they were, hunters of men. He stepped out onto the porch, revolver resting at his hip, his body calm but alert. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, raised a hand in mock greeting. "Morning, friend," the man drawled. "We're tracking 2 runaways. Pair of Indian girls, passed through here not long ago. You seen him?" Daniel kept his face still. "Can't say I have." The man's smile was thin, a blade pretending to be kind. His eyes flicked past Daniel to the cabin door. "Storm last night was fierce. Lot of places a body could seek shelter." Daniel shifted his weight, steady as oak. "Ain't nothing here but me and my stock. Storm didn't bother us." A silence stretched, heavy as a loaded gun. The men shifted in their saddles, restless. Finally, the scarred man nodded, his grin souring into something colder. "Appreciate the word. We'll ride on, then." They wheeled their horses and disappeared over the ridge. Daniel waited until the dust settled before stepping back inside. Rin was trembling, her hands clutched tight in the blanket. Taya stood rigid, her eyes fixed on him. "They will come back," she said simply. Daniel did not argue. He cleaned his revolver in silence, every click and snap of metal steadying his nerves. The girls watched, understanding what his silence meant. Night fell swift and sharp. Daniel barred the doors and doused the lamps, leaving only the fire's faint glow. The land outside lay hushed, but he knew better than to trust quiet. He loaded his rifle and sat by the window, eyes scanning the dark. The sound came soft at first, the crunch of hooves in dirt, the whisper of men moving in shadows. Then the night split with a voice, "Carter. We know you're harboring them. Send him out, and we'll let you live." Daniel rose, rifle in hand, and stepped onto the porch. The firelight behind him framed his silhouette, a lone figure standing against the dark. His voice carried clear across the open land. "You're trespassing on my land. Ride off now, and maybe you'll see another sunrise." Laughter answered him, cruel and eager. Lanterns flared in the distance, casting long shadows of armed men closing in. Shots rang out, bullets tearing into the porch beams, splinters flying past his face. Daniel returned fire with practiced precision. His first shot dropped a rider from the saddle, his second shattered a lantern, plunging half the men into darkness. He moved with the calm of a man who had done this before, his hand steady, his breath measured. Inside the cabin, Taya seized Ren's hand and whispered fiercely. Then, without hesitation, she slipped through the back door into the night. Daniel caught sight of her darting between shadows, her small figure drawing the eyes of two riders circling wide. The distraction was deliberate, brave in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. He fired again, covering her movement, forcing the hunters to pull back. The fight surged and ebbed, gunfire echoing across the plains, the ranch lit by bursts of flame and sparks. One attacker charged close, leaping onto the porch with a knife. Daniel met him head-on, steel against steel, the struggle fierce and breathless until Daniel's revolver cracked at point-blank range. The man slumped, lifeless, at his feet. By the time the smoke cleared, 3 riders lay dead or wounded. The rest, bloodied and furious, dragged their fallen comrades and fled into the night. Their threats carried back on the wind, promises to return, to burn the ranch, to leave nothing standing. Daniel lowered his rifle slowly, his chest heaving, the fire in his eyes brighter than the flames licking at the lantern glass. Taya returned from the shadows, pulling Ren close, both of them shaken but alive. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of fire and the ragged breathing of survivors. Daniel looked at the girls, 2 lives fate had thrown across his path, 2 burdens that had become something else entirely. He holstered his revolver and spoke, his voice steady, carrying the weight of a decision made. You can't stay here. They'll be back, and next time, they'll come in numbers. I'll see you safe, wherever that road leads. The sisters said nothing, but their silence was filled with trust, a bond born in fire and danger. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Daniel saddled his horse once more. The ranch that had been his world for 9 quiet years lay behind him, scarred by violence. Ahead stretched a trail uncertain, but alive with purpose. He rode out with the 2 girls at his side, their figures small against the vast horizon. And though the land was silent, Daniel felt no peace. He felt resolve. The plains would never be quiet again, but for the first time in years, he welcomed the noise.